everyone, welcome to another Hygraph live stream. I'm your host today. I'm Brian Robinson, head of DevRel here at Hygraph. We're going to be talking about, I think, a really exciting new feature today. We're going to be talking about live preview. This was actually something that we launched last week to the open public in the Hygraph Studio. We've been doing some closed beta testing around it for the weeks before that, but I'm really excited to demo what this looks like, talk about how to set it up, and then we're going to do some live coding at the end as well. We're going to set this up in a relatively simple Next.js implementation. We're going to take a look at our blog starter and implement the live preview pieces in that. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here, but I do want to make sure that you know that overall interactive, right? Go post any questions you've got, comments you've got over in our chat, either on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube, or later if you have any questions and you're watching this maybe on the video on demand on the YouTube channel, come over to our Slack community at slack.hygraph.com, and you can ask the questions there too. I'm in there, the DevRel team, the product managers, we're all in there keeping an eye out for questions coming in. So if you're looking to implement this and you get stuck, or you have any additional questions, maybe how to get it done in Nuxt or in Astro, or maybe you're a little bit in an older school framework, we'll be more than happy to help you out with that. So be sure to come on, hang out there if you don't have time for questions today, or you're watching after the fact. Now, the first thing we need to talk about is what is live preview and how this kind of differs from where we've been in the past, right? This is a new feature. We launched it, like I said, last week. The thing here is this is a feature that is all about editor confidence and velocity. So we want to make sure that your editors are able to work, save their content, take a look at their draft, and make sure that they're putting the right content in the right spots on a page, in an app, wherever that may end up going. We want them to have the confidence to keep moving without having to slow down their workflow. So what we had before was a way of doing preview that allowed for a user to click on a button. The button would pop up a preview window, and then you could kind of go back and forth between that. But we wanted to make it so that it was much easier and much faster to deal with that. So we've got this idea of live preview now. It's baked into the Hygraph Studio, the current version of Hygraph. You're not going to get this in Hygraph Classic. So if you're still using that, you do want to upgrade to Hygraph Studio for that, which is the default for all projects currently anyway. So you might as well be in there. And as you can see here in kind of our blog post, which I will share in the chat as well, if you have any interest there, it is all within the studio and allows for an editor to make changes, click save, see them in real time, and know that they've got the confidence to publish those changes when they're ready. So yeah, there's a lot going on to it. The fun part, right, is that it's a headless CMS, so developers still need to do some implementation work around it. But if you are currently set up in the button-based live or button-based preview in the classic, theoretically, when you go into Studio, this should just work for you because we're using very similar methodology in doing it. There is a weird thing in Next.js that we're going to cover when we get into the live coding arena, that the button-based preview works, but you have to do a little bit extra in Next.js to get it working inside of Studio. So we'll definitely cover that as we go. But I want to go ahead and do just a very quick demo to show what this looks like, and then also the basics of the setup within Hygraph, and then we will dive into code. And if you want to follow along at all today, I am going to be using our Hygraph Next.js blog starter, which you can get from the link I'm posting over in chat, or just via the Hygraph app. It's one of the starters you can choose from there when you're working. And so you can see this is actually a finished version of what we're going to be working on today. But we have the Hygraph blog here. I'm just in a blog post. It doesn't matter which one that we're in. We'll go into this one talking about the Next.js 13 app router when that came out early last year. I'm going to click this button over on the right-hand side called Open Live Preview. That's going to take me into the split screen mode where I'm actually going to see the current version of the site, but in draft mode for the content that I've got. So I haven't made any changes yet, so the content still mirrors here. So I'm just going to add a word to the end here so we can kind of see it quickly. I'm going to save and preview that. And you can see over on the right-hand side, it updates automatically. It now shows that, and that's because it's pulling my draft content via the API. Again, we'll talk about the specifics of that in the near future. Jorge is actually mentioning in the YouTube chat right now, I bet it's caching. There is some work to be done around caching, but interestingly, it's also based around Next.js and the new implementation of how they do the draft mode cookie. And the draft mode cookie isn't allowed in iframes. It's not a cross-site cookie. So we have to update that manually because the draft mode cookie doesn't do that automatically. So it's really, really interesting how that works. And again, that works when you click the button and go into a full window. It doesn't work in an iframe. So that's the thing there. But spoilers for later in the stream for sure. And this obviously this works for any content we have. So I can even come into rich text, save a quick one in here, and it will update here momentarily. I can actually see I'm running this locally. So I actually have my console on a different monitor and I can see it updating over there. So here it is in rich text. And let's say actually Jing, who's our amazing content marketing manager, Jing didn't write this article. I did. I wrote this last year. So obviously this is wrong. So I need to update the author. So I'm going to replace the author, change it from Jing to me. And then instead of going and clicking that button, I'm just going to hit Command S and it's going to automatically do that. So we can't get into this workflow with shortcuts and stuff like that. Remember, all about editor velocity, right? So little things there. Obviously, there's no like affordance in the app to show you that you can Command S, but people just kind of accidentally do that sometimes. So like it's just a nice little feature there. And you can see here I am now pulling in and it's there. And just to prove that this is not showing up live, let's head on over to localhost, which is where I'm running the app right now. And let's go to that same post. Oh, is that the right post? I bet I had the cookie set in my browser. That's probably what's happening there. But this is pulling, as you can see here, I don't have the cookies or the stuff set up here on the homepage. This is what I get for going off script this early in the stream. Yeah, I've got the cookie set. I bet we can go clear our cookies and that would be fine here. Let's see. Application. Clear these cookies. And let's go back here. And there we go. All right. So you can see here the test is gone. The test is gone. I think actually in my data, Jing was me testing doing that yesterday. So actually I was always the author on that. That's not an actual change. But you can see those test pieces of content not in the live API, just in the draft API. So they exist here in that. And then also, if I want to, I still can open this up in a new browser window because that is still functionality that we sometimes need when sharing. So I can actually click this link. It's going to do the same functionality. It's going to pop it open into a new tab. I could then see this full width as opposed to in that kind of narrow window. So there's still use cases for that. We wanted to make sure that was still set up for you in the future as well. So that's there as a, not even a fallback, right? But as an additional feature you can open there. So yeah, so that is the basics. But the fun thing is this is not just for blog posts. It's also for pages. It's also for any model you want, just like the old preview functionality was as well. So you can see here is the page section. I have dynamic pages in this Next.js project. I can open this in the preview as well and make a quick change, Command S, and there it is. So again, this is some really intriguing page content, I know, but about this test is now fully in there and ready to go. So again, I can now know with confidence what I can get from my content as I add it in to the CMS. So again, if you have any questions, do post them over in chat. I'm doing my best to keep an eye on it over there. But the actual way this is set up, and again, if you're familiar with our old button-based preview, it's going to seem very, very similar. So what you want in your schema is on any model you want to add preview to. You can see that we have the fields, and I go to the sidebar, and in the sidebar we have this preview field. And the preview field typically would show up over here as a sidebar widget. I've already added it in. We'll cover that in the full demo here in a second. But the way this is actually working, and you can have multiple previews just like you could in the classic version. where you can specify, maybe I wanted to have like a SERP view, or I wanted to have the list page view. All those things, I could actually add a different route in here and move to those pages. So you can see here, I've got my local one. We could, in theory, if this were on a live server somewhere, I could have this direct to the actual website. And as you can see here in Next.js, we're actually going to use API routes to make this happen. But I edit that. I can bring in any of the data from the fields on this model. So I need the slug on this one, but I might need other things too. I could bring in date or excerpt or whatever data I needed to make this work long term. And you can see that I'm also passing in a very, very secret token here. This is just a little protection to make sure that people can't do this unless they absolutely know. And I store that in an environment variable. Again, we'll cover that when we go into it. But I could have multiple previews. They'd all show up there. And then if you look, we've got the slug, and we also have the idea of the model here that I'm just putting a string in there for. And if I go over to my page and go to the sidebar, you can see that we have a whole different URL technically here that I've manually added, where I send the page model in that instead of the post model. And again, all that's important for the actual technical implementation. But if you were to say, need to do this on like a fully statically rendered site, not using a Next or a Nuxt or an Astro, maybe using something like an 11D, you could actually have this go to a built page. So as I save my content, I trigger a build with a webhook in draft mode. The draft mode builds a build process for the draft content, and then I allow the live preview to have that. It's going to be a slower one. You have to do some refreshes around that just because of the way that static sites build, and they can take up to, 11 is a really fast one, or Hugo's really fast one. They're still going to take 30 to 45 seconds for a bigger site. So it's still going to be a little bit of a slower refresh, but it's there. You can have these different URLs for these different use cases as well. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to do this today, live coding in the next 45 minutes. We're going to set this up from nothing all the way to, hopefully, if I do my job right, and I've got a cheat sheet over to the right that y'all can't see, in a fully implemented version of this. We're going to take, like I said, the Hygraph Next.js blog starter, which is fully open source. You can go grab it. You can get a free plan in Hygraph and run through all of this. And we're going to take it, which currently doesn't have it implemented, although spoiler alert, where is it? There is a branch in here, which I will be merging probably this week, that is going to have live preview built in. So if you want to run through it, do it now. Otherwise, you're just going to have it automatically, which also you can go back and view the code and take a look at that. But all this is available in there. We're going to be working through it. Thank you, Jorge. The demo gods hopefully will be on my side. They come and they go, right? It's always always a risk, but I think they will be. I have enough stuff set up, and I have all the code actually written, so we should be good. All right, so things I'm going to do to make sure that the demo gods are on my side. First and foremost, I'm not going to be using this project, and I'm not going to leave a tab open. I've made that mistake trying to demo live preview and had the wrong project open. So here is the live preview live stream project. It is pretty much the same project we had before, but if we go over to schema, you will see that in our page, we're not going to have the sidebar set up properly. Let's click there. So we have the preview over here. Things that I have done ahead of time, you do get a content API set up for you when you come. And I have a project over here that is running Next.js that is going to already have my environment variable with the Hygraph endpoint. This is the regular endpoint. It is already up and running, and we will demo that. Let's close out some extraneous tabs here so we don't run into problems. And let's take a look at localhost 3001, right? We're on a whole different Next website. I know it looks the same, but this is all built from this studio, from this set of data. And the things we need to do first is I'm actually going to refactor the way that this is set up for doing the Hygraph client, for setting up the API requests and the fetch requests. My way of doing it in the past has been to actually do a normal fetch request. And from an educational perspective, I like showcasing that GraphQL can just work without special packages. So a fetch request is great. We're going to be doing some slightly more advanced features to make this work. So I need to do some work around that. And I'm actually going to use a package called GraphQL request. So I'm going to go ahead and install that as GraphQL request. And I'm going to set up a new utils folder in my source directory that's going to have my client. So utils/client.js. And this is where I'm going to set up the GraphQL request library to use the Hygraph endpoint, but also be ready to do live preview inside of it. Be ready to go into draft mode in a very specific way. So first and foremost, we need to import the GraphQL client from GraphQL request. And then I'm going to export out. I could just export, like GitHub Copilot is suggesting here, a new client. I could export this as just the client and be good to go. But I want to, if certain arguments are passed to it, change actually the token that I use to get draft content instead. So we're going to export a new const. It's going to be the Hygraph client. And I'm going to have this be a function. And the function is going to accept an arguments object. I'm just going to initialize that as a blank object. That's just, some defensive coding for later on. And then I'm going to grab off of that. If I pass in a preview Boolean, which will default to false, I'm going to pass that in and get that from the args object that we have. Then I'm going to initialize my client, which is going to basically, at its simplest, do a new GraphQL client. This is all functionality from the GraphQL request library. Again, it adds some easy and ergonomically friendly things inside of what we need for doing this. So we don't have to do all the post body and stuff like that for our fetch requests. So I'm going to set that up. I need to pass it an endpoint, which we have set up, like I mentioned before, as the process.env. It's an environment variable. So this would be a perfect way of just returning here. So we can just return the client out, and I could use this, and it would work throughout the project in place of all my fetch requests. So I've already refactored it. It's already a little bit cleaner if I were to go through and do all that right now. But I also want to go ahead and set up a conditional around what should happen if preview is set to true, right? So we're going to go ahead and do that. So we're ready and raring to go. And I'm going to say, all right, if preview, what we want to have happen is we want to set, it actually already knows exactly what I want to do. Thank you so much, GitHub Copilot. We're going to client.setHeader. This is just functionality on the GraphQL client. And it's going to allow me to pass an authorization token in. In this case, I want to change it to be my preview token. And we're going to get into that in a second when we move back into Hygraph. So right now, for the most part, this is returning false. So I can go ahead and refactor, but let's go ahead and set up our token so that we're ready to go with that as well. So I'm going to come back into my Hygraph settings, and I'm going to go to my permanent auth tokens. So actually, by default, these things do get set, but I'm going to go ahead and set a new one just so we can walk through it from the beginning, right? All this gets set. You get it when you clone the project. I actually cloned this project late yesterday and set up nothing in it. But again, let's pretend like you don't have that from our clonable starter. We're going to add a token. We'll call this Hygraph preview token to kind of match our environment variable. And here in the default stage for content delivery, it defaults to published because that's the primary use case, right? You don't want draft content coming into your main API. But for our preview API, we want nothing but the draft, or we want the draft content, right? That's an important thing. So let's say our default stage for content delivery is our draft. We're going to add that token. And then we're going to say, all right, let's just initialize the defaults. And the defaults are going to come in. They're going to say read only, all the models in the system at stage of draft for all locales. There aren't any locales set in this project, but this would be how you do your localization as well. You can see the default delivery stage is still set to draft. I could change that if I needed to later on. But let's go ahead and copy this token. And again, it's not really a big deal if y'all see this token because it is our read-only token. And I'm going to say equals just because, and let's grab, because I'm really bad at typing sometimes, Hygraph preview token and paste it in. Positioning is also hard. There we go. So Hygraph preview token is set to this so that in my client, when I pass an argument of preview equals true, then we will set our bearer token, and that will allow us to have all draft content flowing in instead of our live published content. So the next thing we need to do is we need to refactor where we've got our fetch requests. We have a few different places in the project. We have a dynamic page generator. So there's a slug with a page.jsx. We have a dynamic blog posts generator at page.jsx inside of slug. And also we have the index page, which is grabbing the blog posts and displaying them there as well. All that's happening. So we will go in and let's go ahead and refactor all of these real fast. We're going to pull up our cheat sheet so that I can take a look and make sure I don't mess any of this up on the fly. We're going to start by importing the Hygraph client from utils client, right? And this @ symbol, we set this up. It's in the project, but in case you're not familiar with it, it is part of the JS config. And basically, it's just a nice syntactic sugar to find the source directory and get anything inside of that. Let's close that so we don't forget it. So we're importing our Hygraph client. And then we've got this get posts function, which you can see we're doing the fetch request and all that. We don't need all of this anymore. We can actually make this much, much simpler. So instead, we're going to do const all posts is going to be equal to, we're going to await. A lot of help from VS Code getting in the way here. All posts is actually going to be equal to, first we need to set up our client internally. So our const client is going to be equal to the Hygraph client, which is a function. We don't want this to have, we don't have any preview functionality set up on the homepage. We could pass it in here if we needed to, but we'll get into that in a minute. We're going to await the client dot request, which is again GraphQL request functionality, and we're going to pass it the all posts. Typing's really hard. The all posts that we are importing up here from our queries that we are also doing down here, right? Instead of doing all this nonsense with the default fetch request, we're basically getting all this done in two lines. And then the data is returned slightly differently. We're no longer inside of a data object inside that. We get the posts back directly inside of that. So let's save that in. Let's make sure we haven't broken anything on the home page. Refresh the page. Everything still looks good there. Let's go ahead and refactor our blog page. So let's move into the posts slug page.jsx. And we're going to do something very, very similar on this as well. We're going to come in to this area. Instead of all posts, we need to also import the Hygraph client from utils client. And then I'm going to copy and paste this just for speed, but we're going to talk about it here in a second. So let me get this from my cheat sheet so we don't waste time. Again, we grab the client off of Hygraph client. Shouldn't have brought this in. That's a spoiler alert right there. Hygraph client, we have a variable that's going to pass in the slug from our parameters coming in. And then we are going to return the post that we get. And then we should clean up our code there a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry. We're not even doing it this way in this version here. We're doing it down below. So we actually need all this. This is why you test code. Let's actually say this is get data. And we're going to bring this down and do this in a more correct way. Why are you erroring down here? All right. So we are going to get rid of this cookie store because that's also some other stuff that I've got locally. All of this we're going to get rid of. And instead, we're going to check and get the data, right? So const post is going to be equal to the await for the get data that we just wrote that function for. In this case, we're going to pass it the slug coming from our arguments here. Why am I writing this here? I should be writing it up there. This is why you clean your code, especially when you're doing open source stuff. All right. We actually have all of this, and we don't need the get data. We're going to replace all the get data down there with this. That's what's happening. Apologies for the confusion there. Let's replace all of this. Again, this is also some cleanup work that's coming to a section near you, to an open source project near you very, very soon. So we're going to have get data. We need the params.slug in that. We're setting the slug here. We do have an error, but it looks like it's cleared itself up. So yeah, we basically just replaced the get data function that is being used both in our generate metadata and in our post component down here below. Yeah, thanks, Jorge. And you noticed before I did that we had both functions there. The get post function was an old one, and I refactored it a while ago and forgot to remove the function. Always keep your code clean. That's the moral of that story. And again, that is going to be clean in the latest version that gets pulled into this repo later this week. All right, so we have the get data. It's functioning. Let's move and let's actually bring this over to the page as well. And you can see that this time I do have this get page function, which I probably shouldn't have. But I'm going to keep it because I'm not going to tempt the demo gods again. And we're going to bring all of my cheat sheet code over again. It's doing exactly the same thing we did before. We're setting our client instead of using the fetch request. We're passing a slug for the variable, and then we're awaiting the request. And it's coming from this params.slug. So let's make sure that this is working over here in the about page. It is not, because we forgot to import. So let's do that real fast. Hygraph client from utils client. And preview is, see, copy and pasting isn't always your best friend. All right, and refresh. There we go. All right, so we are up and running there. And this is now refactored to use this. So now we can get into what we need to do for our actual live preview. I've refactored it to make it a little bit easier to work with for live preview. This is, again, assuming that you don't have the old version of preview set up in your Next.js project. You probably would have refactored into this way if you were doing it that way instead. All right. So the next thing that we need to do, I'm going to go ahead and minimize out of our directories here. We need to, in the Next.js world, we're going to set up an API route that is what we're going to send our preview request to. And it's going to do a few things for us. It's going to set a cookie, which I kind of alluded to before. We've got the is enabled cookie that we need for our draft content. And it's also going to do our redirects for us. So it's going to pass this request to wherever it needs to go. So to do that, I'm going to create a new file in an API directory, in a directory named for what I want my endpoint to be. So in this case, I want it to be the draft directory. And then for the API routes, instead of doing a page.js or .ts, I'm going to make a route. And that's just, again, the way that Next.js functions in this kind of modern app router way of doing it. And of course, this is not a TypeScript project, so we'll see if that ends up biting me. But I can always refactor TypeScript on the fly into JavaScript. So let's take a look at what we need to do inside of this, this request. First and foremost, the thing we need to do is to get our API up and running. So we're going to export out an async function. And again, this is all default Next.js stuff that is going to be with our HTTP mode here, the actual function. So we're going to call it a get. We want this to be a get request. We're going to pass it the request coming from the browser. And then we're going to do some work in here. A couple of things that we do need to go ahead and import. We need to import from the Next.js headers. So from Next headers, we're going to import both draft mode and cookies, which if you were doing this in the old way, you would just need draft mode. But again, we're setting up cookies to do some workarounds for how Next.js functions. And then we're going to also get the redirects. We do need to redirect our user from the API route to one of our actual routes. So let's get the redirect method from Next navigation. And then we're also going to be making a fetch request to Hygraph in this as well. So let's go ahead and import the Hygraph client. Again, it's really nice to have abstracted that out. We're using it in so many places. Honestly, once you've gotten past your second fetch request, it's probably time to refactor anyway and go into this direction. But we've got it here for use later on as well. So a few things that we need to talk about is going to be URL structure. So when we go back in, we're going to set up the schema. In fact, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to go grab it from the other one, and we'll talk about that. Blog post. Not blog post. Too many projects. Life of a DevRel here. All right. So when we come into our schema, as we talked about before, we've got this kind of long URL here. So let's go ahead and take a look at that inside of our schema for the live preview live stream project. So let's go ahead and set up on, let's do post, and we'll go ahead and set up our sidebar preview here. So we'll call this local. Again, you can name it. You get multiple versions if you want. And I'm going to use that exact same thing. So for this time, we're not on localhost 3000. We're on localhost 3001. But you can see we've got the API route, right, from our directory-based structure, API draft. And then we're going to pass it some query parameters. We're going to pass it the slug that we want to redirect to. We're going to pass it the model, and that's going to allow us to change the URL structure. And we're going to pass it a preview token. And we're going to do some work around that as well. So let's go ahead and add this in and click add. And now we've got it as an item in our post sidebar, which isn't going to be working yet. We're absolutely not set up to handle it. But let's see what that looks like real fast. Open live preview. This isn't working at all, right? And some of this is stuff that we're going to fix with that Next.js stuff that we were talking about initially. But also, this API route just doesn't work. It is a broken API route. That just a GET request that doesn't return anything. So let's work at fixing that. So let's go ahead and get our search parameters, those query parameters, and we can get that off of these search params. And we're going to have that come from a new URL. And this is basic node functionality here. That's going to be from the request.url. So we're going to grab the entirety of the URL from the request, and we're going to make a new URL object that then we can destructure the search params off of. And that's going to allow us to grab a few pieces. We're going to get the preview token equals search. I'm going to copy and paste this. Y'all don't need to see me type all this, right? We need three things off of that. Those three search params that we got, the three query parameters that we got: preview token, slug, and model. Preview token, slug, and model, we're going to set those variables. And then let's go ahead and also set our Hygraph client. This time, we're going to go ahead and set it to preview equals true. This is going to, again, swap out the token we're using to be our one that only has draft content. Really important that you do that here. I actually had this break this morning on me before the stream because I forgot to change it out here. And that's because we're going to be making sure that the slug that gets sent exists in our data set. Because if it doesn't, we want to break it. All right, so the next thing we need to do is we need to specify the kind of route structure that we want to redirect to. So I want this to be based on the page, on the model that we're getting back. So I'm actually going to go ahead and set up a quick model URL variable here. We're going to do a let, and this is going to be a blank string if we need it to be. And then we're going to pass in if model is equal to triple equal to page, again, passing it in from that query parameter. Then we're going to set up our model URL to start at slash, because that's where our page routes are from. Or else if model is going to be triple equal to post, then we want to set our base URL, our model URL, to be equal to the slash posts route. And again, there's a lot of different ways to do this. You could do this in many different ways. If we were just previewing our posts, I probably wouldn't even bother with this. But the theory would be that in the next 25 minutes, I get both posts and pages set up. So I'm going to go ahead and write that in. Then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up our query. And I'm going to go ahead and copy this as well, so you don't have to kind of watch me set this up. I'm going to grab from Hygraph a single page or a single post where I'm setting kind of this variable to page, just so I standardize what comes back, because otherwise it'll be post or page depending on what we get. And then I'm going to pass in, because I know our models are equal to our queries inside of Hygraph right now. I've checked that. If I needed to do another string replacement, I could do that here. But I'm basically going to pass in either page or post to do the single query from Hygraph, where the slug is equal to the slug that I'm going to pass it, and the stage is equal to draft. Theoretically, I don't need to check for draft here. I'm just being defensive about it. Originally, this is the way I was doing it, but I think it's good to leave in just to make sure that you're always getting the draft content. Again, we're getting that from the token. but why not? Um, hey, Blessing Karma, welcome to the stream. If you have any questions along the way, be sure to ask. So we've got this query set up. And then the next thing that we need to do is actually kind of use all this together, right? So what we're going to do, I've got something not quite set up right. We need to end our string literal. There we go. And then we're actually going to do a little bit of defensive programming real fast. We're going to check to see if the preview token exists and is equal to what we set up for our project to use. So if the preview token, which we get from our query parameters, doesn't equal the process.env dot, we're going to call it the Hygraph query secret, or let's go ahead and be even more defensive, or it doesn't have a slug, or it doesn't have a model. We need all three pieces of this data to come in, and this is going to be a very, very simple, quick response here. We're going to go ahead and return back at this point a new response for next. So we're going to say response, a new response. And this is going to be, we'll just say invalid token for right now. This could be a much more robust response if we want it to be. And then we're also going to pass it a status of a 401. Say that basically this wasn't found, right? So this is, again, going to circuit break our entire function here. If these things don't exist, let's spell secret correctly, then return this. So let's go ahead and add this into our environment variables so that we don't forget that. Environment variable there. And what did we say for this? We go into our preview and we're going to grab out the MySecret query. Again, you could do like a full hash. You could do all sorts of things if you need to be very protective of where people seeing your draft content. So now this should always work locally, but make sure that you also put these environment variables in your host as well. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to make sure that this data does in fact exist. So we're going to not have caps lock on. We're going to try to get the data from our client. So from Hygraph, client.request. And since we already wrote that query, we're going to send that query along. And then we're also going to send variables. So the second argument inside of the client.request is the set of variables. And in this case, we have a variable that we've already defined up here, which is the slug that we're passing in from our data. So we're passing that inside of an object to get things back. And then we want to do, again, defensive programming. If the data doesn't return or the data doesn't have a page object on it, then we're going to return a new response. And this is going to be invalid slug because the slug doesn't exist is basically what's happening here. Again, having maybe more robust error messages would probably be a good thing. And again, we'll return a 401 to let people know. This could also potentially be a 404, although that would display something I think different in Next. So it's kind of an important thing to think about there. So we've gathered our data. We've made sure that it exists. We're actually going to use the data to redirect. We're going to redirect to the draft slug on it. So the next thing we need to do is we need to make sure that draft mode gets enabled. So we imported draft mode up here. So I'm going to set this inside of Next.js. Draft mode is a Next.js default built-in method, and we can actually have this enable method on top of it. So what this does is it's going to set cookies. It's going to do a whole bunch of stuff behind the scenes. I'm only going to kind of understand myself, and it's going to set that. Now, this is how we'd be basically done in the old methodology. If we were just doing that pop-up, this would work for us. I'm a little draft mode. There we go. I'm like, why is VS Code erroring on me? Thank you, red squiggly underline, for helping there. So we'd be done here if we weren't having to deal with this new world of iframes and cross-site, technically, cookies. So now, instead of being done, what we're going to do is we're going to get the cookies from the response overall. So we're going to have const cookie store, because this is functionality we can get from Next. We're going to run the cookies method. It's going to grab all the cookies it knows about. And from inside of that, we want to get the cookie we need to worry about. So cookie equals the cookie store dot get, kind of the same thing we were doing on our URL parameters up above. And in this case, I happen to know, and all this is actually documented in a GitHub issue on Next.js. This is a Next.js issue that all headless CMSs that have embedded previews get to deal with. It's super fun. and it is the pre-render bypass cookie that we need to do some work on. This is what gets generated by the draft mode stuff. It's all, again, under the hood of Next.js. So I'm going to grab that cookie, and I need to set some new parameters around it. So I'm going to take the cookies store, and I'm going to set a new cookie. It's going to be an object. And I'm going to copy this from my cheat sheet and not be able to fully explain as much as I'd like to. But the idea is we, again, take the pre-render bypass, and we're going to set some values around it. So we're going to pass it the cookie that we just got, the same value that Next.js set, right? We're going to reset it to that. We're going to set it to HTTP only true. We're going to set the path to slash, the secure to true. Those are all, I believe, default settings in this object, but we're going to set same site to none. And this is really the line that matters, but we do have to set all that functionality before it. Otherwise, we won't get the right information at the right time. Why are you erroring here? Property set does not exist on type read-only cookies request. Interesting. Let me copy and paste the entire function just to make sure I didn't typo there in some way. Let's cross our fingers on that and make sure that that's going to work for us. And then the final last thing that we do after we set this cookie is we need to redirect to where this is meant to go. So again, we imported at the beginning the redirect method from the navigation module. So we're going to have a redirect. The redirect's going to take a string of some sort. We're going to do this as a template literal, and we're going to build our URL here. We set that model URL earlier. This is going to be the beginning of the URL that we need. And then I need to pass it the slug that we get off of the page that comes in. So we need this to be the data.page.slug. And this is going to basically be either /slug or /posts/slug, depending on what model gets sent in here. So we're going to save that. I think I've done all my work properly there. We're not completely done, but this should be enough that I should be able to go into our content and refresh. Oh, we're going to run into issues here. This all technically works on the other project, so we'll see if we carry on whether we get something good or not. Let's take a look. Let's restart our server just to make sure that is fine. This should completely error out now. And let us restart next. And let's just see. Oh, it's not even restarting. Unexpected token in TSO. Because, okay, I'm not using any TypeScript here, am I? I don't think that I am. So let's just refactor on the fly to JavaScript. Give a quick scan to see if there's any red squigglies. There are not. And let's run dev again. All right, we're getting errors. tsconfig, because I still have the tsconfig instead of the jsconfig. That's there. Let's get rid of tsconfig because that automatically generated for us based on the way that Next was trying to help us. Thank you, Next, for helping. All right. So let's see if that restart worked for us. It is not working. Again, this should be showing, but again, this is that content security policy stuff kind of cropping up. If anyone thinks through and has any idea on why that didn't fix it, we can look through that. But I'm going to go ahead and move on and assume that I'm going to get to where I need to be because we're not actually checking on this. Ooh, I'm getting an error. That's actually a good thing. Errors are better than no errors every time. Cannot read property of null reading slug. All right. So that means on line 57. All right, so it can't find page, which means that maybe because I just changed this, this should just be data.slug. We'll do some console log-driven development if we need to check on that. Let's see. All right, we're not getting that error anymore. Let's go ahead and grab that URL and let's test it in the pop-up. I guess we don't actually need to test it because we have this lovely button. All right. Undefined. Okay, so we do have an issue, and that is what's causing it. So let's take a look at what we're getting back. All right, so we're getting undefined, which means that something is happening with our data. So let's take a look at what we're getting back from our data. Console.log, the data on that. Refresh this. Oh, don't need to refresh that because that's just a slug. I need to re-click this so that it goes through the API endpoint. All right, let's see. If I need to, I will copy and paste the entire file, but it doesn't like a fetch that's happening, which is interesting. The fetch is breaking because it's getting undefined. So where is my console log? Get request to slash undefined. All right, that's when it hits the page. The data for page is null. Interesting. All right. So that means that something is breaking along the way. We're doing a client request. We're passing in the query. We're sending it a slug. So let's see. We are getting to here, which is good. Let's take a look. Why am I getting data page null? If I'm passing it the right slug, let's make sure that we're getting everything that we need to be getting from up here. Console log, all those fun, lovely things. Let's go ahead and hit that endpoint again. All right, let's find our, all right. So this time we got preview token is that one. We're getting a slug, which is right, but we're getting model page. All right, we copied and pasted the wrong thing. That's why that's happening. All right, let's go into preview. I actually really enjoy debugging live. I think it's a nice thing to kind of show how these things work and what happens behind the scenes. But you can see here, slug, great, model, page. But we're looking for a post. And do I need this to be post or posts? I think it's post, what I need here. And I didn't save it. That was a problem. Always make sure you save it in both places. So instead of page, we get post. Let's save that and update the entire area. So now when we go back to content and click here, all right, we're getting somewhere now. We have a new error to look at. Slug is right, and we're getting this invalid slug, which we know that we're setting, right? We're setting that here. So we are getting our data. Let's take a look at our data. Data is coming through as page slug with the right slug now. So that's good. But we're checking here for data.page. Oh, this should be if data.page does not exist, right? Data.page does exist, so we're hitting this. All right, let's go ahead and refresh this page. There we go. Page not found again, which means that we got something slightly wrong with how we're setting the slug. And that means that, let's take a look at our data again that we're getting. We're getting our data back as data.page.slug, which means that down here, why I removed the page, I don't know, data.page.slug. And then we hit that API endpoint again. All right, so we're up and running here. And let's refresh this page and see if we get a better response. No, we're still hitting that CSP, which we'll try to debug once we get this up and running, which now has the correct cookie set, but we need to check if that exists. So let's go into our posts.page, our post slug page.jsx. And when we have the draft mode, which we were importing up here, when draft mode.is enabled is true, we need different data, right? So in our get data function here, we're going to actually pass in the Boolean that we get from that. So let's take a look real fast. I say let's, I'm looking real fast to make sure I do this on the fly properly. We're going to get off of the draft mode, the is enabled method equals draft mode. And then inside of our Hygraph client, we're going to pass it an object, which is again the arguments object. And we're going to set preview equal to is enabled. And so we're basically checking to see, is this enabled? So in our route, in our server route, we're setting this, right? We said draft mode dot enable. Here, we're using this function is enabled, and it gets a true or false there. And then we pass that to our Hygraph client. And if you remember from all the way at the beginning in our utils, the client that we built has this idea that if preview is set to true instead of false, we set a header with our preview token, which we set also in the environment variables from inside. And also, I think we need to check, did I set? Yeah, both of these are set. Both of these should be good to go. So theoretically, if I go in and save here, we should get the test over in our preview, which we're not. And again, this could be cookie settings as well. Let's take a look at our console. And let's take a look at our posts page. And let me make sure that I'm fully up to date here. Let's see, single post variable. Yeah, all that should be good. So let's go ahead and take a look at the post that we get back and see when that returns. We're getting back all of this lovely stuff, which is from our query. And you know what? I know exactly what's happening here. This is inside of my queries. And again, this is a refactor that was done. Let's take a look here. Single post. Okay, I'm not actually passing anything there that would be causing this, but let's keep scrolling and let's find that title, which should be changed. Posts. So we're not actually getting the is enabled. So let's check is enabled and make sure that we're getting that properly from Next. Console log is enabled. And let's maybe not console log the entirety of the post anymore, because that's a lot. All right. So when we look here, we are getting is enabled as false. So that means that we are not setting it properly inside of our route. So what could be going wrong in our route? Draft mode is enabled. We're setting the cookie like this. Let's make sure, let's refresh this page from here. Again, hit that API endpoint and see what comes up in our console. Is enabled false. So we are never hitting true there. Draft mode enable. All right, here's what we're going to do. In the interest of time, let's grab from my cheat sheet my route, which shouldn't be any different than what's in here. Save this in. Everything else should be working just fine there. And hit the endpoint. Let me copy this endpoint. We can do this a little bit faster. Copy link address. So slug, creating learning platform, Next.js 13, app router, model equals post, preview token, all that good stuff. Send that request. Hits this page, and we're still getting false. All right. Preview equals true set here. Let's double check in our mode here. Let's say console log draft mode enabled, and let's actually check that by checking it. Draft mode is enabled. And then when we hit that, it might just be that I've got another error. I can see like one of those quiet errors in the console there that's failing for other reasons, but let's take a look. All right, here it's okay. Something's going wrong with this stack trace, it looks like. Jorge, your blessing of demo gods has failed. I appreciate it from the beginning, but they're not on my side today. All right, let that run for a second. Let's re-hit that API endpoint. All right, and let's take a look here. What errors am I getting? Why is it erroring? Can't resolve encoding. Let's see. This is not a super helpful error coming from, it can't get this for some reason. Why can't it get that? Which is interesting because I feel like it was doing that just fine before. Let's console log for the heck of it, the client, and see what we get out of that. Because that seems to be part of the issue, is that we're getting very unhelpful error here. Where is that? Hit the endpoint again, now that I've created some space so we can see where it begins. All right. So it is coming in. It's able to find that. So I wonder why it's giving me that error around not being able to embed that. It's enabled as false up above it. We're getting all of this. Draft mode enabled as false. So why is draft mode not being enabled directly following me enabling it? That is the question right now. It's not even this cookie set, right? This cookie is happening after that. Um, although it is running this multiple times. Let's see. GraphQL requests. So we're getting an issue around the GraphQL request and node fetch and all sorts of stuff. But again, that appears to be working. We're getting the data back. So the client itself is working. It's Next.js is enabled and draft mode that doesn't appear to be happening. We're not hitting this. We're not hitting this short circuit. We are getting down here to the draft mode. We are setting enable, which I believe is the right functionality there. Let's double check. And again, this is working in the off-screen version. Let's take a look. Next.js draft mode dot enable. I just want to make sure that we're setting that properly. Grab draft mode from Next.js headers. Inside the request, we're going to set draft mode dot enable. That all makes sense to me. That I think is what we're doing. Double check our import. Draft mode is being imported from Next headers, which is what we want. Yes. And then down here, we are running draft mode dot enable. Let's copy and paste just to make sure. That is what that is. Let's give us some space and take a look again. Let's run this API endpoint again. And let's see what we got. Draft mode enabled is false. Well, I'll be honest, y'all, I am at a loss on that. This is legitimately the route that works in the other one. Well, and I'll tell you what, here's what we're going to do. With 3 minutes remaining, I'm going to take additional questions, and I'm going to put out the promise that this will be something that we have an actual video on in the near future on setting this up, because it is, if you've never set up draft mode in Next.js, it is not the easiest thing in the world. It has some bumps. Next.js is one of those things that everything is explicit. So you do kind of have to set everything. We actually have a version of this in Nuxt that you just pass it a query parameter and it just works. Nuxt has all sorts of magic that happens behind the scenes on that. You don't explicitly set any of that, but it is perhaps sometimes an easier way of getting up and running until things break. In this case, the tiny bit of magic that Next is doing for me is what appears to be breaking on me, and I'm a little bit confused as to why. So we'll do a polished video on this. We'll send it out, and we'll have it out there for you. But again, as I kind of showed earlier in the process, and just so we can see it live and running, here is my my original version with everything kind of the same as it just was. We'll go on over into the one that's connected to it, which is blog down here. And so the same thing is happening as I just kind of outlined it, just as a recap here. I have in my schema a URL in the preview. It's going to localhost 3000, which is what this other one's running on. In the API draft, we're passing it query parameters. We're sending it the slug from the data available in the model. We're sending it the page or the model, whether that's page or post, and then a preview token just for protection. Then inside of our content, we have the ability to come in, set the slug and all of that, and we can actually change all of this, open it in live preview. It makes that request to the API endpoint, sets draft mode, sets the cookie inside of Next to make it work inside of an iframe, and then allows for all of that testing. This code base is fully, let's call it fully operational inside of GitHub in a pull request. Let me pull that up real fast. Let's see, that is in the Next.js blog starter. I'll actually share this in the chat right now. And again, this is actually going live, maybe even today, inside of the Hygraph Next.js blog starter. So you can clone one of those and be up and running there. All this is working in this code base. You can take a look at how it's set up. It follows the methodology that I kind of outlined here um, in how it's supposed to function. So yeah, if you have any questions or you want to dig deeper into this, again, let's go ahead and promo out that we do have the Slack community. The Slack community is available for all of your questions. And you can come in, say, hey, Brian, I know exactly how you messed that up. Change this and take me to school on it. Absolutely. But yeah, come join us, ask questions along the way. And again, all this that we kind of demoed, including the new live preview stuff, it is available on the free accounts on Hygraph, hygraph.com/sign up. Again, there is the Next.js blog starter as one of our starters that you can go through and get there. Again, live preview coming to the GitHub repository today or tomorrow. And yeah, if you have any additional questions other than in Slack, our documentation does cover this. There's actually, let's show that real fast. Inside of Hygraph's documentation, we do have, I'm going to try to find it. API reference, I think. No, let's see. Let's go to the blog post. The blog post should have a link to it. I'm a little nervous about the doc search. Let's see if live preview is in here. Live preview. So in this, we also have in the front end implementations, the information around getting Next.js, Nuxt, and Astro all up and running. You can kind of use your framework of choice. Any of them will work. We've got these three set up for what you need. So again, thank you so much for tuning in today. Sorry we didn't get quite up and running. I don't know what's happening with that draft mode inside of Next there. It works on my computer, or at least worked before the stream. And yeah, we'll see you in the community. Keep doing awesome stuff. And thanks again for tuning in today.